Hello all. Last episode was short and sweet, but today we're looking at another mini movie. Stay tuned until the end where I've got a teaser concerning the contents of next episode. Before I launch into anything though, let me preface with something off topic first. Last month my uncle passed away and his memorial was scheduled for the end of September. So I'll push out an episode next week, but the week after that will be the first week of October, and I won't be able to do an episode then. I've already voiced this before, but I live in Canada, where a short drive is 4 hours, and my uncle lived 10 hours away. That's 2 days of driving alone, never mind the visits. So I'll be able to launch an episode right before I leave, and then I'll likely be radio silent, or close to it, until the middle of the following week. For clarification, that's October 4th that there will be no episode. Okay, with that out of the way, what happened last time? Lots of Lee and lots of Minato. Going forward, we'll be reversing time to figure out the moments that are leading up to Ino's arrest. We're finally taking a look at the offending team of the Triumphant 12. Are they truly sinister in their intentions? Did they free Danzo? Was Naruto lying to Lee? Or is there something more ambiguous going on? Well, we just have 5 more episodes of plot thickening before getting our ultimate answers to all of this. I know, 5 episodes is a long time, and I want to get these over with too. But I'm not going to rush through them and miss out on vital, cool details. With every single character showcased so far, and the episode designated to them, there have been plot-relevant details to both this arc and arcs to come. And I go out of my way to drop all those info bits for new listeners and re-listeners alike. Obviously, the most astute among you will be picking up on all the information I'm putting out, but I will say that, at least of the vocal portion, everyone's missing random tidbits here and there. Shino's episode comes to mind immediately about a certain plot point that no one mentioned even once. And that missed information that I'm referring to is huge. It's huge! I'm not really shooting myself in the foot by revealing this ongoing mystery, because I've already revealed that there's something big in his episode, and even with that second chance, still, no one got it. So perhaps I was being a little too subtle, and also maybe by the end of this rewrite, if you choose to listen again, you'll notice that bit of information and slap yourself on the forehead, blown away that you missed it. Honestly, that's my favorite feeling as a reader. To miss a detail and on a second or third return to the book, pick up on something that I never saw before. Heck, my best friend has read Wheel of Time maybe a dozen times. That's a 15-book series, and he still comes across stuff that he's never ever caught before. And he loves it every time. That said, this is my first time trying such a long-term mystery, so I might just be missing the mark on some of these setups. But there are episodes as far back as episode 8 that has information no one's figured out precisely yet. Starting last week, we started looking at not the Resistant 5, but the Sinister 6. These nicknames were chosen by my weirdo Discord people, so we're just running with it. So far, only Tenten has not taken a side, and I wonder whether she will before this plotting hits its execution phase. Technically, Lee hasn't either, based on his concluding involvement in last episode. At the very least, we know Naruto invited him to go along. And if we're being honest, I wonder if there's somewhere else he would go in this situation. Minato really hit a low point in arresting Ino for little to no reason. And if your comments are anything to go by, Ino is apparently a terrible liar. Finally, remember to smash that like button, comment below, and share to anyone you think may be interested in a long-form, alternate storyline of Naruto. On with the show. Day 5. Squatting in one of the high branches of one of the training grounds trees, Ino hugged close to the leafy branches and peered down at her target below. A water clone of herself, hiding at the base of the tree, was sure to throw her target off should she be detected. Lunging suddenly at the tree, Hinata thrust a palm into the trunk, and her chakra reverberated through to the water clone hiding on the other side. As her clone began to dissolve from the sudden imbalance of chakra entering it, Ino leapt down behind Hinata, fully aware that the latter likely watched her drop into view. But the eyes were always faster than the hand, and Ino dove into Hinata, who did not so much as move out of the way. Just as this second Ino, a genjutsu copy of her real self, smacked into and went through Hinata, the real Ino dropped down from directly above. As expected, Hinata was prepared for this triple whammy offense and guarded just right against Ino's dropping kick. The two connected for just an instant before separating again, and Ino weaved a mudslide jutsu, hoping to deny Hinata a moment to think. Answering the attack with a fiery breath, Hinata leapt and landed vertically on the trunk of the tree Ino had just been hiding in, so that the mudslide would miss her, and a mid-range offense could keep Ino from applying constant pressure. But she focused too long on the incoming mudslide and allowed Ino to again slip in behind her. "Mind transfer jutsu!" Ino shouted from point blank, allowing Hinata no time to react. At the very least, she thought to herself in her last moments of control, Ino was now also standing on the trunk. When her mind transfer struck, Ino's unconscious body would fall into the mud. And so the jutsu struck, and the now possessed Hinata leapt to dry ground below. As she walked towards a nearby picnic table to sit down, she explained aloud, "Hinata, Hinata, Hinata." Sitting at the bench, the possessed Hinata looked back toward the tree and exclaimed, "So this is what you see?" Removing the possession, Ino returned to her body, and Hinata looked at her puzzled. "Did you dispel the mudslide jutsu? Why are you still so clean and dry?" "Ino loses consciousness for a little while after using that jutsu," Ino explained to Hinata, speaking oddly in the third person. "I'm babysitting until she wakes up." And you are, if not her?" Hinata asked cautiously. "Ino is two beings in one," she replied simply. Her voice had not changed at all. It was discomforting that she suddenly called herself someone else. Eyes shutting for a moment and head rocking back, Ino jerked as if waking from a sudden attack of sleep, took a breath, and looked around. "My win?" she asked, brushing past Hinata's confusion. "Ino, what was that your..." Hinata muttered, anxious for her. "Guy-sensei always told me I should be capable of it," Ino answered, rolling her eyes at the concern. "I guess I caught on." "Wow, you've taken away your major weakness," Hinata celebrated, impressed that Ino could even pull it off. "Well, it's a double-edged blade," Ino shrugged. "Isobu is nice most of the time, but in the heat of a fight, he might just do what he wants with my body and, wreak havoc." The two had been sparring since the break of dawn to keep their bodies in shape for any kind of sudden mission that might come their way. They may have been grounded in the village at the moment, but emergencies break protocol all the time, and they weren't going to be caught out unawares. "Anyway, has the painter's voice echoed through the trio's gallery?" Hinata asked Ino, using code words to hide names and vague metaphor. At the very end of their sparring, Hinata caught a glimpse of another nearby, hiding in a tree with her Byakugan. Kiba Inuzuka. As long as there was even a chance that he was in earshot, Hinata was going to throw them off as much as possible. And it was Sasuke and Sakura's ideas to begin with anyway. Each of them were assigned a color and also a number to interchangeably refer to one another. It was difficult to keep track of. Naruto was red and 1. Sasuke was blue and 2. Sakura was pink and 3. Hinata was purple and 4. Ino was teal and 5. It was confusing, even for Hinata, to smoothly use the names and mix them up as they spoke to each other. Sakura insisted this would be the easy way. Ultimately, though, it had proven to keep each of their identities safe. They were also instructed to use vagaries to describe any instructions or changes to their plan. Naruto decided they needed to pair off as well, to watch each other's backs. Sasuke was with Hinata, but this early in the morning, Sasuke was still working alongside Tsunade to catch up on all the training he had missed out on, as well as to help organize the rubble that was once his clan. Neji normally followed Hinata around like an incessant bodyguard, but over the last few days he had been notably absent, which prompted Hinata to seek him out constantly through her Byakugan. Sakura was with Ino, but Sakura the last couple mornings was busy elsewhere. It concerned Ino, even if a little bit, that Sakura could have maybe turned coat, since she continually refused to tell Ino where she went. For now, Naruto worked alone, though he told them all that he would liberate Lee from the jails, and after that be paired off with him. That was the first stage of their action plan, and it would not be until after Lee was broken out that Naruto would send further instructions as to the next step they were going to take. They were altogether taking enormous strides to keep themselves out of the eyes of suspicion, especially considering how unhinged the Hokage had been lately. At least since they all returned, he was clearly a different person, changed completely. But in Ino's talks with Shikamaru and Choji, neither of them seemed to notice anything different about him. She couldn't figure out if it was her that was being overly paranoid, or they were blind. The canvas remains untouched by Red's brush, and the melody has yet to reach Three's ear, Ino answered, immediately catching on to the warning with Hinata's code word usage. A murmur drifted from the twilight to the solitary beacon, and it's believed the cycle aligns in 2 chimes yet, Hinata told her. They were both pretty tired of this system. They had to decipher their messages to each other on the spot, because Sasuke didn't want any kind of written messages between any of them. Since they knew someone was watching them, they weren't even using the simple code words they had assigned to each other, like blue. They had to use words like twilight, even though it was Kiba, and he probably wouldn't have caught onto their message regardless. It was good practice. Solitary Beacon in her message was obviously Naruto, but Ino had to memorize Hinata's words to mull over later and figure out what the rest of the message even meant. Well, I'll guide the shadow from our little alcove, Ino smiled, bidding Hinata farewell quietly before loudly adding a fake answer. What? He's there right now? I gotta get there quick! Without another word, Ino dashed towards the village as quickly as she could. She wasn't a sensor ninja herself, but the sudden rustling of branches told her that Kiba was attempting to spring to action. Ino didn't actually have anywhere she needed to be, so she cut down the nearest alleyway she could find. With Kiba's nose, he'd know if she just stopped still, so Ino continued along her path, running up the wall of a building so she could dash across rooftops. As she ran, she produced 2 water clones, who cut off in different directions. To her surprise, Kiba took the bait. Chasing one of her clones in the complete opposite direction, Kiba somehow gave her the slip. Twirling on the spot, Ino wondered when she should dispel the jutsu, a little sad that she wouldn't be able to see the look on his face when he realized he was tricked. Clones were one of the simplest tricks in the book, and had he used his nose, would have never fallen for the trick. With some time to kill before Sakura typically became available, Ino decided to play with Kiba. She dispelled her clone as soon as she got within eyeshot of Kiba, so she could watch him freak out. Sure enough, he explained, "What?" before grabbing at his hair and groaning. Exposing herself from cover, Ino quietly walked up to him and asked, "What's up, Kiba?" "Ino," Kiba answered quickly, spinning to face her and dropping his hands from his now lopsided hair. "Don't play dumb. I was specifically leading you astray. Ino smiled at him as her eyes sparkled playfully with how else she could torment him. Look, you don't understand, Kiba stumbled, avoiding eye contact with her. You were watching me and Hinata spar, weren't you? She pressed to alert him to how long she knew he was watching. It's not what it looks like, Kiba insisted, shaking his head. And what does it look like? Ino's smile grew wider, amused. Well, I'm not some creep, if that's what you're trying to suggest, Kiba said, a bit of annoyance in having to explain himself. Frankly, I'd prefer that to you eavesdropping on us, because that's pretty scary. Ino could barely hold back her laughter as she continued to push his buttons. What? Kiba stammered. You'd want me to look at you? Blushing, Ino shook her head. No, you idiot! But would I want you to be a traitor? Not as much. You know what? All you girls are impossible, Kiba admitted, lifting his hands in defeat, irritated at the conversation now. I've spent the last 4 years away in the middle of nowhere. No friends, no families, no strangers, no one, Kiba complained. So excuse me for being shy around girls. You're nice to look at, but that in the training grounds was my own kind of training so I could work up the courage to get close and talk to you. Taken aback by his sudden admission, Ino softened immediately. It didn't matter whether it was a ruse. She had to play up the social aspect as well. Well, you didn't even approach me this time either, she continued with a chuckle. So, Ino resumed playfully, backstepping from Kiba, try and catch me. As Kiba growled at her challenge, she leapt to a rooftop and taunted him from above. Even from her standpoint, she could still hear him growling as he took a couple steps before leaping to the rooftop himself. Laughing aloud at his perceived anger, Ino fled from Kiba as he tried to catch her. For the better part of an hour, they darted around town, and Kiba came close several times, but ultimately never caught her. She hid in the trees a couple times and gave him the slip for just long enough to make some distance. At other times, she dove in deep shadows to the extent that even with his nose, Kiba would stare right at her without realizing she was there at all. Eventually, as Ino darted to and fro in an attempt to break his ankles with her sharp turning, she spotted a familiar face on a neighboring rooftop. Leaping to Sakura with a bit of labored breath and laughing as Kiba had just barely missed her again, Ino found reprieve at last. Kiba was getting closer and closer with every attempt to catch her. Sorry, didn't realize you two were talking, Ino says as her eyes flutter recognition on Shikamaru and she glances behind, looking around, no Kiba in sight. As Shikamaru clumsily excused himself, Sakura turned to Ino and told her, I just had the most intense conversation in the world. And I just had the most intense game of cat and mouse I've ever had, Ino laughed, grabbing Sakura's hand and inviting her to lunch. The sun wafted high in the sky, a blinding disk of molten fury that scorched the barren infinity of sand. Even with the Three Tails granting her greater resilience, Ino was not spared from the relentless agony of the desert's wrath. Her throat was parched, each swallow of air as dry and abrasive as the desert wind. As dehydrated as she felt, sweat streamed down her face anyway, only to evaporate without granting any reprieve. Her legs felt as if they were wading through molasses. Even her eyes, stinging from the glare of the sun and the gritty sand, were bloodshot and raw. It had been a week since she had emerged from the water with no idea of how long she had been kept under by the three-tailed beast. There was no sign of communication attempted from it to Ino, despite her multitude of questions. And now she was tired, hungry, thirsty, delirious, as she wandered aimlessly. She cursed her decision-making to attempt a trip through the desert, but she had no trustworthy water source on the beach, and it was an emergency effort. A low, deep rumble echoed through the stillness of the desert suddenly. It was vague and directionless, yet so profound it seemed to resonate within her bones. Ino mistook it for the distant rolling thunder of a storm. an unlikely weather event in the arid wasteland. The roar came again, more insistent this time, like the growl of some colossal beast awakening from a long slumber. The sound was both unsettling and fascinating, a primal force that seemed to shake the very fabric of the desert. In her exhaustive state, Ino stopped wandering aimlessly and began attempting to zero in on the sound's location. Despite how tired she was, Ino found her pace quickening, driven by the inexplicable force. The roaring became a cacophony of sounds, a symphony of thunderous growls and howls that filled the air with an almost palpable energy. Cresting a dune, Ino beheld a shifting mass of sand. Forgetting herself, she rose from her cover as she beheld the monster's clearer form. A supermassive tail of sand trailed behind a titan of the desert, shaped curiously like a tanuki. Atop its head, Ino could barely make someone out, perhaps someone controlling it? Taking some wobbly steps towards the creature, Ino teetered and fell, rolling down the hill, unable to stop in her weakened state. Her eyes felt heavy, as though she could sleep right where she was, despite the harassment of the elements and the danger of the now incredibly close proximity of this monster. All the creature kept doing was roaring and slapping its tail about, creating massive sinkholes of sand. She knew that she was supposed to feel endangered, but she oddly felt a strange sense of kinship with the creature. It felt like her journey to this great monster was a trial against nature's cruelty, culminating in a deeper exploration of her own limits. She felt that she might be hallucinating the monster, perhaps envisioning the Three Tails as this last obstacle in the final leg of her journey. Waking next to a fire in the dead of night, Ino weakly tried to sit up, but found no strength to hold her. She could barely see through the fire at someone on its other side, staring right back at her. "What were you doing out there?" the stranger asked monotonously. "Ah!" Ino uttered, finding her innards just as dry as everything else around her. Leaning towards the fire, the stranger picked up a clay cup and handed it to Ino. Given her lacking strength, she could barely summon the willpower to lift the cup to her lips. Immediately, she coughed and hacked, as her body lurched in realization of its own dire needs. The water slipped through her mouth and down her throat, leaving a rejuvenated path in its wake. Almost as if the sand itself had packed her throat closed, she couldn't stop from choking on her elixir of life. Slowly but surely, Ino managed to get enough down that the process became smoother. No one could survive more than a few days out there, and you approached a monster. The stranger continued. "You look like you were out there for longer." "Ah!" Ino uttered again, this time unable to speak simply from exhaustion, as the water had well lubricated her throat now. "I came from the land of Earth." "Well, that's impossible," the man answered, just as dully as all his previous words. "You would have had to be walking for a week non-stop." Nodding slightly, Ino laid back down and sleep took her instantly. The next time she woke, it was morning, and the fire was out. Sitting across from her was no longer a stranger, but someone she had seen before. Gara of the Sand, son of the Kazekage. Sitting upright, having found her strength at last, Ino asked, "Gara? What are you doing out here alone?" "I grew up here," Gara told her, handing her another cup of water, poured from a leather-skin container tied at his waist. "Surviving here is as easy for me as surviving in the forests for you." "You remember me?" Ino asked after taking a few mouthfuls, thinking that she didn't really leave an impact at the Chunin exams. "No," he answered coolly, "but your headband is unmistakable. How did you survive so long in the desert?" Ino had gone her whole life, successfully hiding her Jinchuriki identity from people. But now she sat across from someone who was themselves a Jinchuriki. She knew she could not tell him, but wondered how long it would be until he picked up on the hints. Even if she suffered endlessly for its own self-preservation, the Three Tails would have undoubtedly kept her alive. But she also had no excuse for how she would have otherwise survived a week in the desert. "I had a skin of water with me that I rationed carefully," Ino answered after a short silence while she thought of an excuse. "One of the nights that I fell asleep, I woke up to it missing. Nodding, Gara answered, "The sand eats everything." It was swallowed up. "Are we near civilization? I was hoping to find an ally. Our attack on Iwa was a disaster," Ino explained, wanting more than anything to have a bath and sleep in a proper bed. "Yes, I heard," Gara nodded. "After Orochimaru vanished, the remaining Leaf forces were scattered." He didn't vanish," Ino muttered dreadfully, shaking her head. "The Tsuchikage killed him." Eyes widening only slightly, Gara answered, "You saw him die?" "My classmates and I tried to assist him in combat after everyone else had fallen," Ino muttered, excluding her lack of involvement. "But clearly we weren't enough." "How did it take you a year to get here? Were you taken prisoner?" Gara asked. "What do you mean? No, I escaped capture," Ino answered, confused perhaps by his wording. "So it took you a year to run from the land of Earth to get here?" Gara repeated, his voice finally reflecting a slightly higher inflection, one of confusion. "Why do you keep saying a year?" Ino asked, her voice clearing up, but confused herself. "I couldn't have been traveling for more than a month." "Orochimaru vanished a year ago after the fall of Iwa," Gara told her, shrugging at her time dissonance. Perhaps she was still confused from her extreme dehydration. "That can't be!" Ino would have cried at that news, but tear generation was the least of her body's concerns. "We are close to home," Gara answered the other part of her initial question. "I'll take you there, but we'll wait until nightfall." Why are you out here alone?" Ino asked, pushing past the stress of losing a full year of her life to the Three Tails. "The demon within rages almost as much as I do," Gara told her. His tone was flat, but his wording suggested some level of humor. "Whenever I feel its rage building, I leave the village, so it doesn't cause any damage," Gara explained. "My father used to stop the transformation for me, but I thought maybe I could control it myself. Not so far." "You did come across as kind of unhinged at the Chunin exams," Ino chuckled a little. "You kind of scared me back then." "Violence stirs something in me," Gara said. "But during times of calm, I can remain so as well." As twilight struck, Gara guided Ino through the desert back home, to the village hidden in the sand, Sunagakure. They traveled all night, and as she had experienced already, the desert became frigid without the sun to warm it. But she had grown used to the temperature fluctuations between night and day, and it did not slow her down. Dawn came before they reached the village, and Ino realized that had Gara not helped her when he did, she would have wandered so far in the wrong direction. The Three Tails undoubtedly would have been forced to take her over just to preserve her life. As the village came into view, Gara stopped and lifted his head as he peered into the distance. From within the village walls, Ino saw a tornado of gold churning within. "My father is fighting someone," Gara observed calmly. "Mist ninja, maybe?" "Do they attack often?" Ino asked. She wasn't going to react stronger than he would. Clearly, he had some sort of confidence that his father could hold his own. But of course he could. If he was anything like Lord Fourth, it would take quite the opponent to take him down. "Nevertheless, we better go and see," Gara said, walking with slightly greater urgency to enter the village. Ino could not get a lock on Gara. He was either locking his emotions deep inside, or he was kind of crazy and didn't react to anything the same way most people did. "Stay back, Tamari!" Rasa commanded, conjuring a swirl of gold dust to buffet her backwards and away from their opponents. "Find your brothers and sound the village alarm!" For he was well aware of who he fought. A missing nin of the village hidden in the sand. Sasori of the Red Sand. It was all Rasa could do to ward off the puppets and multitude of weapons in a constant volley at him. And he knew Sasori was playing with him, that at any moment he could release his poisonous gas and kill everyone in the village. Even for a traitor, Rasa hoped that Sasori held on to some nostalgia for the home where he grew up. Or at least for his grandmother Chiyo, who was still very much alive. If that wasn't bad enough, Sasori was accompanied by one of the Mist's bloody swordsmen, one of whom Rasa recognized as Mangetsu, perhaps one of the most dangerous swordsmen. Rasa! Sasori rattled through his protective puppet shell. At the very least, Rasa was well aware of all of Sasori's abilities and most of his secrets. All the Anbu that had arrived to aid Rasa were summarily distracted and killed by Mangetsu, who seemed like he wasn't even taking the situation seriously. Because these Akatsuki agents had snuck within the walls before starting their assault, Rasa was also very limited by the magnitude of defenses he could mount. And of course, they provided no explanation for why they were even assaulting the village. "Father!" Kankuro shouted from behind a wall of gold dust Rasa had built up to keep civilians at bay. "Let me fight with you!" "You are not ready for opponents like these," Rasa insisted, unable himself to cause any lasting damage to either of them. Mangetsu only had to swing his strangely ethereal sword to kill the chakra in Rasa's gold dust. Meanwhile, Sasori seemed to have 1,000 artificial barriers of puppets and other such machinations to shield him from all attacks. In addition, Sasori's mastery of puppetry allowed him to simultaneously launch attacks and keep Rasa on the back foot. Rasa knew that even if he did push the two too far, Sasori at any moment could press his kill switch. "Rasa!" Sasori repeated in his uneven, taunting voice. "Where is your menace of a son?" "I am enough for you," Rasa laughed, lifting his hands and turning the entire wall behind Sasori and Mangetsu into soft sand that avalanched down upon them. Mangetsu appeared to leap to safety, while Sasori seemed to be successfully trapped under the mass of sand. Rasa did not have the technical ability of Minato, or the insane strength of A, but he did have an effortless manipulation of gold dust mixed in with the sand around him. It was more difficult for him to defend against direct attackers like Mangetsu, so now that Sasori had been dealt with, he wasn't even sure how to deal with the swordsman. Black Ant, one of Kankuro's puppets, careened past Rasa to distract Mangetsu, but it just took one single wave of his sword to sever the chakra string connections and kill the puppet without touching it. "Blast!" Kankuro cursed. "What is that weapon?" Sand slammed into Mangetsu as Tamari swung a fully opened fan at him. For this, he did have to brace himself for a moment before weaving a jutsu that formed a wall of water between him and her. It wasn't likely to hold for long, but a swordsman like this didn't need to stall for time. "Where is your brother?" Rasa shouted as his two older children frantically attempted to assist him. "We need..." Rasa grunted in surprise as he felt a sharp jab in his side. Looking down, he found 5 needles embedded in him. With just his puppet shell's head free from the sand, Sasori was clearly not yet out of the fight. "Stay back," Gaara told Ino, as they turned the corner and saw a man standing before them with a black cloak and red clouds. He was a large man with a mask covering his face. "I knew if I was patient, I could intercept you," the man laughed, turning towards Gaara. "I don't think you realize what you're up against," Gaara said, eyes turning hard as all the sand around Ino sprung to life in anticipation for the oncoming battle. "There's more fighting beyond him!" Ino pointed past the man blocking them. "Your father must be over there." "Not Mist Ninja then," Gaara muttered, a wicked smile growing. "Get away from me, Ino." "Then I'll go help your dad," Ino answered, running around the Akatsuki man. He actually ignored Gaara and stared instead at Ino. "I know your face," he mumbled, before his hand seemingly detached from his body and thrust at her neck. "You're the Leaf's secret Jinchuriki!" Gaara's growing sadism halted, and his smile faded slightly as he looked toward Ino. He said nothing, but Ino for once saw all the emotions of realization pass over his face. She had no idea how anyone outside the village could have known that she was a Jinchuriki, but clearly this man had access to a lot of spies. "That Shisui brat was good for something after all," the man laughed. "Two birds with one stone." "Ino, if you have a demon inside you, release it," Gaara shouted as a swirl of sand encased his body and he became a hybridized sand monster. Half his face was still him, and half was that sand monster that Ino saw in the desert. "We can afford to lose some of the village," Gaara explained recklessly as he launched at the Akatsuki man, forcing him to drop Ino and pay attention to Gaara's direct assault. Massaging her neck for just a moment, Ino sprinted forwards toward the second battle yet again. Leaping over a wall of gold, Ino beheld a man with white hair plunging his sword into the fallen Kazekage. They were too late. "Okay, Three Tails," Ino whispered, staring at the other two men in Akatsuki garb. "It's now or never. Help me out." Sliding down the other side of the wall, Ino ran towards danger, even seeing Temari and Kankuro a little further from their father, both injured and bleeding. "You stupid beast, I hope you do something!" Ino growled as she continued her charge at the attackers. They both looked up at her, but the white-haired man paid no mind. The shorter one leapt in her way and cackled, "Ino Yamanaka, Jinchuriki of the Leaf." It was in this moment that she realized one of the known rogue organizations, a crime syndicate dangerous enough to fell a Kage, knew who she was. This caused an enormous spike of fear in Ino, and she buckled immediately from the Three Tails' surge of energy within. It had controlled her for a full year, doing as it pleased. She hoped that this time it would not be so dominant. "Mangetsu, give me a hand," Sasori instructed, watching Ino transform into a supermassive water. "If we're quick enough, we can neutralize her before she fully transforms." "Whoa!" Mangetsu exclaimed, clearly less informed than his more veteran Akatsuki ally. "This saves us a trip!" "It'll make taking down the Uzumaki brat much easier later," Sasori agreed. "Mangetsu," the three-tailed beast muttered angrily. "Puppet to him." A projection of the shorty with purple eyes appeared in Ino's mind again. "Hey!" Ino's mind woke up when shown the projection. "Take him out and we both win." "Squishy alone. Dangerous together." The Three Tails groaned as Ino saw both the Akatsuki members looking at the Three Tails in her mind's eye. "Share control then, and I can help," Ino insisted. "Share?" the beast answered, almost confused by the prospect. "Don't make me sleep," Ino clarified. Though these Akatsuki were certainly scary to her alone, now that she was within the transformation of the Three Tails, she felt like she was inside a fortress. The confidence that had been drained from her came back so easily now. "Share," the Three Tails repeated in agreement, and Ino felt control of her body given back to her. "You protect my body, and I'll protect you," Ino reassured, looking down at their two foes. Making a snap judgment that the shorter one was slower, for some reason, Ino formed her family's hand seal and focused her chakra for the mind transfer jutsu. Though she uttered the words of the jutsu, no voice came, but the jutsu activated regardless. Not suspecting an attack from her at this point, the shorter man with the strange metallic tail emerging from his backside did not move at all to evade what he couldn't see. Her mind passed through the outer shell of his body and struck something. Where Ino found herself now was less than total darkness, as if she never had sight to begin with. She couldn't breathe, but nor did she feel like she was suffocating. It was like she transferred into nothing but a brain, missing its body. and she couldn't tell if this was a defense mechanism or something strange with the man's body. There was no sound here, nothing to indicate to her what she had transferred her conscience into. She couldn't even be sure that she had hit his body. For all she knew, she missed and hit some blind worm hiding in the sand behind. Now was not the time for dawdling, so she decided to dispel the jutsu and try again if she had missed. The time it took for her mind to return to her had a couple of variables impacting it. The amount of chakra was obviously linked in, and would allow her conscience to travel more quickly in either direction. But her physical proximity also played a role. The closer she was, the better. Additionally, there were a variety of mediums she could use to artificially shorten the distance traveled. She could use something like a rope or string to transfer her mind more efficiently through to connect faster. Or, in the case of the Three Tails' swelling body, she could pass through its body nearly instantly. When she opened her eyes, it took a moment for Ino to reorient herself before discovering the short ninja she had aimed to possess indeed lay in a dead mess on the ground. She wondered what it was she connected to that robbed her of all senses, but either way she was able to take one of them out of commission, at least for a little while. She had no idea what happened. Mangetsu alone was not enough to overwhelm the Three Tails as it grew in power and anger at the swordsman's very existence. The great watery mass of the Three Tails suddenly rocked forward, rolling over the still lifeless body of the tailed Akatsuki as Gaara and the other Akatsuki smashed into it from behind. Despite seeming to just be made of water, the Three Tails form was very sturdy, and even cutting through its surface did not spill the contents from within. This effectively cushioned Ino from essentially any blow that would befall the transforming beast. "Keep your focus on the white-haired man. I'll watch your back," Ino shouted, swiveling in her weightless bubble and shifting closer to Gaara's side of the battle. "Control," the Three Tails muttered, and Ino suddenly felt her bubble pulling back toward the center of the mass. "Hey! I've helped you once already. Don't do this," Ino muttered, her energy suddenly draining away. Her body slumped and she felt her consciousness withdraw, but curiously she could still see through the Three Tails' eyes as the tailed man suddenly thrust to life, even while squished underneath the mass of the Three Tails. His mouth opened and a cloud ejected from it and entered into the body of the amorphous liquid mass. The Three Tails quivered as it fought to suppress the poisonous gas, and in this moment of weakness, the tailed Akatsuki was able to pull away from being crushed. The vision shifted from the tailed man to the one occupied by Gaara, as he belted out a chain of elemental jutsu that each smashed into Gaara's transformed arm. Ino felt a second sudden drain of energy, despite feeling like she was already asleep. It was as if she was in a lucid dream as she watched the world through the Three Tails. But the lucidity drifted to a blur. Darkness surrounded her, and all things faded away. Eyes blinking, Ino groaned from full-body soreness and tried to roll onto her side. Just as before, her mouth had gone totally dry, and she hoped there was some water nearby. She didn't think about what had just happened or where she even was, as her focus zeroed in on getting herself a drink of water. But it was dark, and when she tried to stand, she knocked her head against a low ceiling. Rubbing her eyes, Ino looked around and realized she was behind bars. The ceiling above was a higher bunk bed. Outside the cell, sitting against the wall opposite, a girl with a large metal fan sat, but Ino was too dazed to remember her name. "You gave us a bit of a worry there," the girl said with a raised eyebrow. "We're used to only dealing with my brother's tantrums." "Why am I in jail?" Ino asked, wincing through a pain in the side of her head, and reaching up would reveal quite the goose egg. "Gaara stays himself when he goes crazy, and he attacked the bestial side of you," she explained. "Once we broke you free, we thought that was it, but you continued to try to attack us." "I wonder why that is," Ino muttered, hardly able to recall anything from what happened. "Gaara said you were starving and near deadly levels of dehydrated, yet you still gave control to your beast?" she pointed out. When the host is so weak, it's very easy for the beast to take complete control. How did you not know that? Did I hurt anyone? Ino asked, terrified at the implications of the beast going wild inside a major village. No, she answered after a time. But you did some significant damage. You're going to be in there until we can confirm that you're safe. I've kept the beast safely sealed for my whole life. I think I can handle myself, Ino reinforced, because she was absolutely right. We may be allies, but that doesn't mean we'll automatically trust you, the Sand Kunoichi answered back, irritated by Ino's presumption. A door opened, and in entered Gara. Tamari, I'm here to relieve your shift. Well, she's awake now, Tamari said, standing quickly. Just gotta get some food in her, and we'll see if she levels out. It's coming, Gara told her, looking into the jail cell at Ino. We failed, Ino. My father died. Shivers ran down her back as Ino realized the implications behind that news. She was there. Oh yeah. She watched it happen. She remembered that bit. I'm very sorry for your loss, Ino muttered, and though she bowed her head in shame, Gara kept a glare straight at her, all the same. We were neutral in the war, and then 15 months later my father dies to foreign attackers. Gara explains to her. They're called the Akatsuki. They attacked during the Chunin exams as well. Oh, right. Did you take any of them alive? Ino asked as Gara's explanations helped her recall what had happened. We followed them with some trackers when they fled, but they gave us the slip, Gara said through clenched teeth. Ino could even hear them grinding. The village might decide on a different fate for you, but I'm going to have you pay back the debt of delaying my return home, Gara told her, a rather merciful judgment call. Had I not seen you, I'd have returned a day earlier and been more ready to protect the village. Nodding, Ino agreed to his sentencing. That's fair. All 3 attackers survived, though both tailed beasts did a number on them. The swordsman Mangetsu had been heftily mauled by Gara, and save for a skilled medic, they did not think he'd perform so well the next time he was in a fight. They destroyed Sasori's outer shell as well, which blew Ino's mind since she was sure for the entire duration of the fight that it was his body. Though that still didn't explain why she lost all sense when she possessed him. They gave her far more than she needed for food before moving on. Leading her from the village, Gara spun and sized her up. I've never met another Jinchuriki before, he said. I think we can help each other. That's not true, you met Naruto at the Chunin exams, Ino corrected for him. I wonder what his beast is to be housed by such a coward. Gara mused flatly. No, you're different from him. I also don't have any control over my beast. I don't know how we can help each other. Ino shrugged with the unfortunate news. I saw you in the fight, Gara began. I watched you work separately from the beast, while entirely consumed by it. That wasn't... Ino muttered. That wasn't me. That was it. Regardless, Shukaku does not allow me to do that, even when it comes to defending my father. It was Gara's turn to mutter as he clutched at his head and began groaning. What's happening? Ino asked him, no one else around to help. The beast is waking up, Gara growled. Hair on Ino's arms prickled as she watched Gara struggle to maintain control. Her heart raced as she watched Gara's eyes glaze over as his once calm features twisted into an unfamiliar mask. A wave of dread washed over her, a familiar sensation she'd experienced so often before. A surge of empathy replaced her fear. Gara, it's okay. I know what you're going through, Ino said with a soft but firm voice. You can trust me on that. Stay away, he growled, his voice overlapping perhaps with the beast's own voice, his eyes for a moment flickering with recognition. Reaching out, Ino placed a gentle hand on his arm. I won't hurt you, she said, her voice far more steady than she expected. I can help you." To her surprise, Gaara's body tensed, but he did not pull away. A flicker of hope ignited within her. Maybe, just maybe, she could break through the darkness that had taken hold of him. Maybe, just maybe, he could help her control her own darkness. Blinking, an expression of confusion draped across his whole demeanor, Gaara stared at her. "How did you do that?" "It doesn't matter," Ino shook her head. "What matters is that you're okay now." And so time passed as Ino repeatedly helped to quell the monster within Gaara, and he helped her to visualize her beast for what it was. They weren't just tools and weapons, but prisoners. Gaara had no care in the world that he was the jailer, simply using the metaphor to accentuate how much a prisoner plots to escape. Show a moment of weakness or turn a blind eye, and these beasts will take advantage. They're intelligent minds, not mindless monsters, and it was unfair to treat them as anything less. Gaara explains to Ino that the best hunters have a healthy respect for the threat of their prey. Turn away for a moment, and even a little wild boar can gore you. With Shikamaru and Choji helping Ino for her whole life to keep her monster in check, Ino was also able to provide insight on keeping tabs on these creatures. He did not realize that it was his own unstable emotions that gave openings for Shukaku to grasp for control. It was a compounding problem for him because he pushed people away with his wild mood swings, and his loneliness facilitated further mood swings. He was in a self-destructive circle and needed to find a way to level out. Though he claimed to not need friends, Ino insisted that friends would help him more than anything else at keeping the beast contained, even if they didn't do anything so obvious or overt. In training their own control, they also needed to let the beasts take control numerous times so they could watch as each other reacted to the possession. Gaara's partial transformation allowed him to keep the Shukaku spirit reined in, whilst also granting it a voice. Shockingly to them both, Shukaku actually spoke to Ino and requested a conversation with the three-tailed beast. In an unprecedented moment for them both, Gaara and Ino watched their tail beasts partially manifest and actually interact with each other. Historically, it was known that the Shukaku spirit was the first of the tailed beasts to be sealed within someone. Combined with the three tails' timid nature, and it made for a shockingly calm interaction. Ino expected them to rage against each other, but they wordlessly regarded one another, and she wondered whether they communicated in other ways. But in their cooperating with the beasts to allow this reunion of sorts, the beasts themselves then became far calmer. Ino soon became able to partially transform into that amoeba-like state with her as the core and keep fully conscious and in control as long as she remained within the mass. But there was still so much more that she could learn how to do as long as the three tails remained so cooperative. And this was noticed by Gaara's village as well, as his feral transformations went from a monthly affair to not happening once after 3 years. Gaara told her after just a few months of training that he would not send word to the Leaf of her survival. Without a leader in the village to trump his decisions, Gaara made the decision to keep her around until they could figure out their beasts. It was with these eased conversations and interactions with her beast that it eventually told her its name. Isobu was very shy, and though willing to work with her, it insisted that sometimes, in the presence of certain individuals, it feared that it might be unable to control itself. It was still unwilling to share its long history with her, but Ino decided that she didn't need to know. As long as they worked together, they deserved to keep their own secrets. Ino wondered just how much this cooperation would continue to make her stronger as a kunoichi. If the random outbursts were willed away, and she could direct the power, surely this would make her powerful and reliable. Sasuke crouched low, his body blending seamlessly with the shadows stretching across the village. His eyes darted from side to side, scanning the bustling streets for any sign of the Hokage. The village from a tracker's eyes was a maze of narrow alleys and winding paths, making it the perfect place for any ninja to disappear. Normally, he should have been unable to track Minato's movement, but Sasuke was using every skill he had ever learned in his life to stay as quiet and as fast as possible. It had already taken a week to learn the 4th Hokage's movements and patterns throughout the village, but now Sasuke had to successfully keep up with him. Minato did not wander the streets, instead using the same techniques as Sasuke to leap around from place to place. No one of the normal citizenry had any idea Minato was out and about. The Hokage moved with grace and agility as everyone knew him for, but something about the way Minato stopped or suddenly took off again felt stilted. Perhaps it was extreme microactions, or perhaps Sasuke's paranoia was getting to him. But there was something extraordinarily slight about his movements that threw Sasuke off. Minato in motion was fluid and effortless, but transitioning from stationary was where Sasuke noticed the problem. No one is static, and it was very possible that over 4 years, Minato had decided on a different method of getting around. It could have been something simple like taking off with the other foot, but even that didn't make any sense to Sasuke. A couple times as he tracked Minato, his heart lurched as the Hokage abruptly stopped and spun around. His gaze swept the surroundings with sharp intensity, and Sasuke had to hold his breath. But these momentary stoppages concluded with a shrug as Minato continued about his day, seemingly unconcerned. Most suspicious of all Minato's actions, however, was his refusal to use the flying Raijin. Sasuke had no idea why he wouldn't use it as he visited the hospital, and then the ninja academy, and then Lord Orochimaru's old lab. He went all over the place, and sometimes a decent distance as well. Sasuke thought that the job of a Hokage was extremely busy, and that Minato wouldn't be able to spare all this time traveling on foot around the village. Cursing a sudden misstep, Sasuke dropped into some bushes rather clumsily by his own estimation, causing the leaves to flutter rather loudly. This was enough to pull Minato's attention to his exact location. Unlike the previous close calls, Minato approached the bush Sasuke hid within with narrowing eyes. Stabbing a hand into the bush, Minato caught his tracker by the wrist. The Hokage's grip was like iron, and for a moment Sasuke feared that he was exposed. But then a flicker of recognition passed over Minato's face. Konohamaru? Sasuke knew that he had to act quickly. Pulling a transformation jutsu, he disguised himself as one of Shikamaru's genin. It was a simple trick, but Sasuke hoped it was enough to keep him from being found out. "What are you doing here, Konohamaru?" Minato asked, exuding suspicion. Just passing through, Lord Hokage." Sasuke, as Konohamaru insisted, altering his voice as accurately as possible. "We're on a mission to find a cat. Thought it would hide in bushes like these." Minato studied him for a long moment before his face turned to eased satisfaction. "Well, good luck with that," he said, releasing his grip on Sasuke's wrist. "I think I know the cat you're talking about. I saw it closer to town." Sasuke nodded, relieved that he had managed to fool Minato, but actually kind of concerned as well. He had successfully evaded the most skilled ninja in the village, but should he have? Minato should not have been so easily tricked. Following Minato's instruction, Sasuke headed further towards town, but once he rounded a corner, he released the transformation jutsu and approached Minato again from a different vector. It was too important to give up on following him around just because he had been caught once. He just needed to be yet more focused, more quiet, more astute. Minato's latest stop was the jails, for which Sasuke found an easy vantage point to keep eyes on its front entrance. Given that it was a prison, the building only had one entrance, and that was also its exit. He wondered why Minato would come here as well. He couldn't possibly imagine that Danzo would be placed in the normal jail of all places. Sasuke thought that the village had some deep, dark dungeons for criminals of that caliber. But Naruto had also told him that Lee was locked up here, so that was certainly a possibility as well. Furthermore, Inoichi, a clan head, was oddly placed in charge here. Sasuke wondered why the Hokage would place such an important person here to take over for Ibiki in his absence. On that thought, Sasuke also knew that Choza had been placed as the gate guard, another trivial task for a clan head. Meanwhile, Hizashi Hyuga was not given any odd jobs like those and was free to continue his day doing his own duties. Sasuke wondered why the Hokage was assigning these placements. The sun crawled across the sky, and Sasuke couldn't figure out why the jail of all places was where Minato would spend the rest of his day. Sasuke couldn't risk going inside and raising suspicion, but he also did not want to abandon his post without knowing for sure that Minato was still inside. Evening came, and a man in uniform approached the building as Inoichi exited. They exchanged a few words before Inoichi left, presumably for the day. So, sprinting ahead of Inoichi, Sasuke aligned his path to intersect with the Yamanaka head. As they came into contact, Inoichi gave Sasuke a courtesy greeting, but Sasuke stopped him and asked if he might know where the Hokage might be. Inoichi tells him that it's Minato. He's always flashing around, of course. He was at the jails earlier, in fact, but like always, blinked on out of there. And that's the end of today's episode. I know, we're back to feature-length films. There was a lot I needed to cover between Ino and Gaara, as well as what happened to Rasa. They were besieged by Akatsuki, but the attackers were forced to flee when set upon by not one, but 2 Jinchuriki, in addition to Rasa's efforts. To clarify, in case there was confusion there, all 3 Akatsuki got away with their lives. Sasori got hammered pretty good, and Mangetsu took a hit that might leave a lasting memory. There was a period during this time that Gaara was shipped off to help the war efforts against the Mist, but that all took place in the first year of the time skip. That's right, after Ino transformed and submerged into the water, losing consciousness, Isobu maintained control for a year. She has a more deliberate seal holding the 3 tails within her, more deliberate anyway than Naruto's. So where Naruto has these weird rubber band effects from the fox vying for control, Ino doesn't have that. The 3 tails can only take control from her in extremely specific situations. But now, while Ino doesn't have complete dominion over Isobu, their cooperation is at a level never before expected by Ino. Quite frankly, she thought her life would be that of a warden who never interacted with the prisoner. To be able to weaponize this power is obviously something village leadership would much prefer. Hopefully we get to see the spoils of her long training with Gaara. And there were a few hiccups here. Gaara during my Chunin exams was odd. I tried to write him as controlled chaos, as if he didn't quite have control of his power and willfully let his emotions go astray. This resulted in some peculiar moments where he stood still and seemingly calm while the sands raged around him. And unlike in canon, Gaara didn't have a grounding moment where he was defeated by Naruto and humbled by the experience. So I needed to figure out how Gaara could go from this violent, ambivalent, unpredictable entity to someone who was willing to actually work with Ino. Because Kid Gaara would not care to save Ino from the desert. I feel like he would have just left her there. He needed to be a little bit older, if even just a year, so he could have a modicum further maturity. It was also difficult nailing his composure during the fighting. He still goes sadistic in the face of violence, but until he's in that battleground, he's indifferent and calm. And of course, Ino doesn't know him that well, so she's kinder than most would be. They also had their connection of the tailed beasts that I thought would raise eyebrows for him, if he had eyebrows. But in canon anyway, I kind of didn't understand his invisible growth. To go from the Chunin exams to Shippuden, he was an entirely different human, and we the audience didn't get to see that transformation. He was just a different person the next time we saw him. So in this flashback, I wanted Ino to be that gateway that would allow him to more organically mature. And it's kind of weird to talk about, but as unhinged as Gaara is with Shukaku, he is also the most experienced Jinchuriki with the transformation. Except for probably Killer Bee, because he's, 3 times older, twice as old? And we haven't seen him in person yet. Saw a transformation, and otherwise he's been in the background so far. For the beginning bit, I wanted some playful flirting with Ino and Kiba, because I feel like even in these moments where the Sinister Six are plotting something that could be very serious, they're still teenagers. I think it's totally believable that in these moments of reprieve, they'll just jump at the chance at playing around. And at the end of the episode, we learn that Sasuke's been keeping track of Minato's habits from afar. And he did learn a few minor things that I specifically didn't clarify, because again, these are breadcrumb mysteries that together solve the grand question mark that is Minato. I made some vague statements, but ultimately, that's as far as I'll go in that regard, at least for now. And without further ado, I thought I'd mix things up. Last week I announced that I was doing teaser riddles in my Discord to encourage some fun problem solving as a way to hint the contents of the next episode. Well, that's actually working pretty good, but I figure why not just toss that riddle at the very end of the episode? Next time on a very exciting episode of the Naruto rewrite, here's your riddle. Amongst the forgotten, they found their place. A hidden talent in a hopeless case. With thieves and others, they learned to thrive, to navigate a world where few survive. Through battles fierce and struggles deep, they faced the void, they did not sleep. With unique gifts they found their way, a beacon of hope in endless fray. A little bit of a longer one today. Thank you for tuning in, and as always, the sky's the limit.